Hey guys, Tony here, and I'm back to talk about an album. So this is another random pull to review an album that's probably still relatively obscure, but one that you should check out nonetheless. It's a sort of well, first it's by an artist that a lot of you name you might recognize, and that is Bruce Palmer, and this is his album. The Cycle is Complete. I believe this was released in like 1970 or 71. So yeah, Bruce Palmer is primarily known as the bass player in the Buffalo Springfield. There's a lot of stories surrounding him, but the story of the history of him sort of joining the Springfield and everything. So he's a Canadian. He met Neil Young in the Toronto area. And they joined, they met Stephen Stills, who I believe was on tour at the time, I think in some folk outfit, and they met him and they wanted to play together at some point, but I think Stills was on tour, and he had mentioned that he was going to go to L.A. So, meanwhile, Bruce Palmer and Neil Young, they joined a band called the Monubirds, which featured future super freak Rick James. At the time he was called Ricky James, called sort of a Mick Jagger wannabe, that sort of thing. And they were signed to Motown for a little while, for just a brief period. And it's interesting because I think they were like the first mostly white group signed to Motown. And Neil Young had talked about how all these Motown sort of heavyweights were coaching them, and they recorded some stuff. But meanwhile, Rick James was in the Navy. He was actually AWOL from the Navy during this time, and he was deported. He was busted, and so the band broke up. So Neil and Bruce decided to go to L.A. and find Stephen Stills and join a band. So they take Neil Young's hearse. It's a famous story, They take his hearse and they travel from Canada to L.A. to look for Stills, and they couldn't find him, and they were about to leave and go to San Francisco and try their luck there with the whole music scene going on at that time. So they were stuck in traffic just trying to leave L.A., and traffic on the other side, there was Stephen Stills, who spotted the hearse, the Canadian plates, and realized it must be Neil. And the story is, they got out in traffic, and that's how the Buffalo Springfield was born. Well, Bruce Palmer was the bass player in the Springfield, and he was only in the band for about half of their career. He kept getting arrested, I guess, for busted for weed and driving without a license, etc. And he was deported. He didn't have a working visa. He was deported back to Canada, and he was replaced in the band. And they said that Springfield was never really the same without Bruce. Neil Young has always spoke very highly of Bruce Palmer as a musician, saying like early on that he was a better guitar player than Neil Young and Stephen Stills, but instead he played bass, sort of a very funky, loose sort of bass player, very competent bass player. But the story is on him too, is that he's often compared to maybe like a less severe Skip Spence, or a less, sort of drug casualty sort of thing, like Syd Barrett, but a little less severe. The line on him is that he blasted off to Dimension X as soon as they got to L.A., So, he was, from what I understand, he was a lot of trouble to deal with, but he was such a great musician. But anyway, he was deported, and I think the story is too, he snuck back into the States, disguised as a businessman, and rejoined the Springfield just before they broke up. And so I think, again, he went back to Canada, sort of gigged around a little bit, and then I believe the label Verve Forecast actually approached Palmer to record an album, which is interesting because he was never known as a songwriter. I think he said he had never written a song before. So what he did was he assembled I believe him or the producer of the album assembled the musicians to play on it. And this is what the result was. The Cycle is Complete. Now this features members of the LA sort of folk psych fusion band Kaleidoscope. Members from that band. Also features the percussionist Big Black, who played with a number of people. Like I know he played with like Eric Dolphy and Sun Ra. He plays congas, and Rick James also plays percussion on here, as well as contributing like these sort of these nonsensical scat-like vocals. So what you have here basically are 4 long jams sort of folky, jazzy, psych jamming. Now, if you like the band Traffic and how they sort of jam, it's sort of a non-structured jamming throughout. So really 3 long compositions. There's 1 shorter song. So it opens with Alpha, Omega, Apocalypse. Again, fantastic like oboe playing. You have acoustic guitar throughout, great bass playing, lots of percussion going on. Interesting. Again, just jamming. And then there's the short song Interlude, which gets compared a lot to Traffic's Low Spark of High-Heeled Boys. I think because of the piano, that consistent dun, 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 that's very similar. But this actually predates that by like 6 months. On the second side, you have Oxo, which is very similar to Alpha Omega, just long jamming. And then the Calm Before the Storm, fantastic track, very sort of mysterious sounding, if you will. Heavy on the Mellotron, which isn't credited on the album at all, but yeah, heavy Mellotron, a very cool track, and this is just a really cool album. I really enjoy it. This is a reissue on Verve Forecast. I believe Mike, Bostonian Reggie, had this first and talked me into getting it. But yeah, so after this, this was a disaster, I guess, for Verve Forecast, and it's the only album he ever did. He resurfaced one other. After this, sort of disappeared into obscurity again, and resurfaced only one other time, and that was to play bass on Neil Young's Trans. And he played on the tour. I want to say he was fired from the tour, like he was just a nightmare to deal with. By this time, he was drinking a lot. And he passed away, I think, in 2004. But a fantastic musician, really interesting album. Again, if you like that sort of jazzy, folky jamming, you would like this quite a bit. It's a very cool album. So yeah, Bruce Palmer, The Cycle is Complete on Verve Forecast. Check it out. So here you go, guys. Thanks for watching. Leave me comments. I'll see you soon.